All right, obviously we're here to address the weekend violence that we saw over the weekend, and I think there's probably some other topics you may want to talk about as well. But we'll start with the weekend violence with regards to the shootings. From July 3rd to July 5th, we saw about 13 people shot exactly, shot over 10 incidents. Many of which occurred Saturday night into Sunday, which is July 4th into July 5th. As we saw the number of shootings, we continue to take a number of guns off the streets as well. We're experiencing a culture of violence in our city that we're seeing in other cities across this country that is plaguing urban communities across the country. Basically what we know is that disputes coupled with accessibility to illegal firearms and poor choices are the leading causes in many of our shootings that we see. A display of nonsensical behavior, families are being destroyed, communities are being destroyed as well with regards to some of the shootings that we are seeing across this country, in our city. We are seeing people pick up a firearm, point it at a crowd, pull the trigger right in front of the police, as we saw on our triple shooting on Charlie Avenue. You know, people are feeling emboldened for whatever reason in this climate, and they want to challenge authority and are committing crimes as such. That is a situation that I just described that could end up in a deadly physical force encounter. The police officers that responded were in the area, did a remarkable job. They heard the shots, saw the individual, pointing the firearm, pulling the trigger, and they chased the individual down and took him into custody. You know, these are situations that can go from 0 to 60 just like that. Law enforcement cannot do this work alone. The violence that we saw over the weekend, law enforcement cannot do this work alone. What stands between lawlessness and legitimacy in our communities is Rochester police officers. Our Rochester police officers and our citizens who say enough is enough. And throughout the weekend, like many weekends in our city, Rochester police officers are what stands between lawlessness and legitimacy in our city. We need the community's help. I've always said that we cannot do it alone as a police department, and if an all-hands-on-deck approach is not taken to what we've seen in our communities and across this country, we are in for a rude awakening. The priorities of society are in the balance, and society needs to define what we value. For me and the Rochester Police Department, what I value is public safety. There have been some in our community who are fed up with the violence, and I would gather to take that there are many who are fed up with the violence in our community. RPD will continue to work with our partners in the community and government to continue to eradicate violence. I think some of the instances that we saw over the weekend, as I talked earlier, about just the emboldenedness that people have with regard to committing crimes, challenging authority. I think we saw an incident on Pennsylvania Avenue where individuals challenged police officers. I don't know where we are at in society, but it will never be okay to put your hand on a police officer or to threaten a police officer. That's my stance on it, and that will always be my stance on it. I'll take any questions that you have.
Chief Singletary, was the police department hindered in any way trying to answer the number of 911 calls that were coming in pretty much at the same time while still trying to protect the city? Well,
I think, 4th of July, we typically see probably an uptick in calls for service as every year. But this year, yeah, I mean, we did receive a lot of calls this year with regard to the number of individuals who were shot. Like I said, the lawlessness that we saw over the weekend, but one thing that will remain a constant is that we will continue to go out there and do what we need to do to ensure that this community is protected. Is it challenging at times? Absolutely. The officers who work Saturday night and Sunday morning work their tails off, trying to maintain order in this city. But again, we cannot do it alone. We have individuals in this city who feel emboldened, who feel that they can pick up a gun, they have access to a gun, and they settle a dispute, or for whatever reason, we are seeing large crowds gather, and as a result, we're seeing, firearm violence take place. And in this case, we had a police officer who was right in the area, a couple of police officers who were in the area, and at the same time, this individual was challenged by the police officer and taken into custody. Those are situations that can end up in a deadly physical force encounter. those are situations that our police officers are dealing with today. And like I said, the violence that we're seeing is not unique to Rochester. We're seeing this in many urban communities across the country. And, you know, like I said, RPD officers are what stands between lawlessness and legitimacy in our community. And I know that there are many people in the neighborhoods who are fed up with it as well. So the officers worked very hard Saturday night into Sunday morning.
Chief, we know there was an officer who was attacked in one of these instances. Can you tell us more about that scenario and how that officer feels?
So the officers responded to, I believe it was a 16-year-old who was shot. The officers tried to assist EMS to provide medical attention to the victim. You know, you have officers there who are there to help. You know, you have individuals who I think live down the street, who were not part of the original situation, who, for whatever reason, decided to come and antagonize the officers while they're trying to do their job. Again, it will never be okay to put your hands on police officers. I'll stand up here every time and say, I'm about accountability. You know, I hold my officers accountable. I expect people in this community to be held accountable. It would never be okay to put your hands on a police officer.
You see how that individual is doing? Is he recovering okay?
The officer, yes. The officer was punched in the back of the head, and there were several individuals of this group that came down to try to prevent officers from doing their job. The individuals grabbed officers for whatever reason. They thought that was okay, but it's not. They were arrested, and they were charged appropriately.
What is the effect of the bail reform that's been talked about for quite a while on the emboldenedness in the sense of a consequence for lots of alleged offenses, not just the, is that, where do you see that playing a role?
Well, I think it's too early to tell, but certainly what I can speak to is that people know that we do not take people to jail anymore for certain offenses. And when you talk about maintaining some sort of quality of life in neighborhoods, you know, the low-level crimes that typically had teeth, that we typically enforce, that no longer are available to us, you know, it makes it tough to enforce those quality of life issues. It makes it tough because residents have to deal with those issues in those neighborhoods. But one thing that I can assure the residents that we will continue and we will adapt. We will continue to go out there and protect and serve our communities. I think the discussion preliminarily right now, yes, is it having an effect? Absolutely it is. It is having an effect on us to be able to police these neighborhoods for the individuals in the neighborhoods who want to live law-abidingly, right? Who deserve to have a quality of life, who deserve peace and quiet at night. Like I said, the level of lawlessness that we're seeing, like I said, it's just not our city. And I want to say it's a certain few in our community that are creating the ruckus. But we won't stop.
Chief Singletary, going back to the Pennsylvania incident, I talked to the parents of the 16-year-old who was shot. They complained to me, saying that they haven't heard from any of your officers on their son's case, so to speak. What can you tell the parents? Because they want to know why they're not hearing from the police department.
Well, I tell you what, it was a very busy weekend. I'm sure we made contact with the family that night. Certainly there will be some follow-up that will take place as a result of the investigations. Like I said, I mean, typically in a matter of 2-3 days, we had 10 people shot in our city. But certainly they will be contacted. That's what I would tell them, that they will be contacted. That I did. I'm glad you relayed the message, but I'm sure they were contacted that night and had follow-up conversation with the individual and probably the family.
As you said, there tends to be an uptick in shootings on holiday weekends like this, 4th of July maybe, and you try to prepare ahead of time. But did you expect there to be this many, or was it still a shock, even with that preparation?
Well, let me clarify. I didn't say there was an uptick in shootings. I said typically there's an uptick in calls for service right around the holiday period. I mean, do I expect, I mean, my imagining is that there were no shootings, right? But one thing that is hard to control in this line of work is human behavior, right? So we are, we've tried to put measures and things in place to try to prevent things from happening. But again, what we see in Rochester is our disputes, as our shootings are dispute related. which means that you have individuals who cannot settle their differences, or someone who has quick access to a gun, who may have tempers flare right there in that moment, and they pull a gun, pull the trigger, and next thing you know, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 people shot. We had a couple shootings that involved multiple victims, and during one incident, I think we had one on Jefferson Avenue, we had one on Charlie Avenue. So those incidents, you know, you talk about crowd control, you talk about maintaining scene integrity, so that way we can try to find out who's responsible or who pulled the trigger. But it makes it difficult for us to do that when you have large crowds that are gathering, when you have officers who are trying to do their job, and we're met with some sort of emboldenedness from the community. I don't know why that is. I think I've followed and talked to other colleagues across the country. It may be the period and moment that we're in right now with regard to some of the arrests. It may be COVID. It's too early to tell. But again, I want to make very clear that it will never be okay to put your hands on a police officer.
Chief, you have funding cuts, not just your department, this is also something that's going on around the country. With this uptick right now, do you see any kind of long-term impact or even short-term impact on the ability to do your job?
Yeah, I'm glad you said it. It's short-term impact. We're feeling it right now. You know, we're feeling it right now. I would imagine there's going to be long-term impact. But yeah, I think now is not the time when you talk about defunding the police. You know, I've said it and I'll say it over and over again that I think the communities that are going to suffer the most are black and brown communities when you talk about defunding the police, as evident was this weekend. You know, we had 13 people shot in 10 incidents. You know, those incidents are happening, this gun violence is happening in communities of color, in communities, urban communities across the country. So yes, I mean, when you talk about reimagining the police, or when you talk about doing things differently, let's make sure that part of the plan is to address the things that we are addressing. And I think some of the reasons why we got here to this point is because of other systems that are broken, and things are being placed into the lap of law enforcement. So, you know, let's just make sure that that's part of the solution when we're sitting down at the table addressing some of the things that we're currently addressing right now.
You mentioned that you were working with community partners. You said it earlier. Can you be specific about who the partners are and what you're doing, and maybe laying out some kind of timetable?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of people in the community who are, like I said earlier, are fed up with some of the violence. You know, I know there are many, you know, there's ROC the Peace, there's Rise Up Rochester. These are long-standing partners and relationships that we have garnered over the years. And like I said, the police department is never going to be able to do this alone. We're never going to be able to eradicate violence or put a dent in violence alone. What we need is people in the community to say enough is enough. So, you know, I had a meeting this morning with the deputy chiefs and commanders about strategies. We're always going back to the board and seeing what we can kind of do to help reduce some of the violence that we've seen, or respond to some of the violence that we're seeing. And a lot of it is basically boiling down to individuals making poor choices. But as a police department, we must be able to somehow still, whether it's through high visibility, going after individuals who we know carry firearms, or having high visibility in those areas where we have seen violence take place in the past, and coming up with different strategies, whether it's bike patrols, foot patrols, things of that nature. And along those lines, those things take resources, right? And I also have to couple that with the summertime is coming, right? People want vacations. Police officers are entitled to time off as well. You know, like I said, I couldn't be prouder of the men and women of this department. You know, they work their tails off Saturday night into Sunday morning. You know, some of the problems that you know, part of being proactive is what we did over at the beach. You know, sometimes you just can't predict where incidents of violence are going to take place. You know, we did everything that we needed to do at the beach, and luckily, knock on wood, all things went smooth at the beach. But that's all part of planning. That's all part of a strategy that we put into place. So now we have to look and see how we can continue to prevent some of these disputes. And I always say that we need the community's help in doing that. You know, with the accessibility of guns that are out there on the streets, we have taken a number of guns off the streets this year of Rochester, and we continue to do that. So I think the next question is, what can we do to ensure that people are being held accountable for possessing these guns? Because we can only do so much as a police department. You know, if somebody calls us and says that there is a person carrying a gun, or we make a traffic stop or stop someone on the street and they possess a legal gun, yeah, we can arrest them, take them to jail. But what happens after that? We're coming into contact with people who have been, who are awaiting gun cases, and sometimes it's their second or third arrest on a gun charge. So, like I said, the police department can only do so much, and, I think part of it is changing some of the dynamics within the neighborhoods. We talk about working with our community partners. It's going into that neighborhood and doing something different, with community organizers, walking the block, doing things, changing the scenery. We do a lot of crime prevention through environmental design in some of our quality of life areas in the city where we typically receive a lot of complaints. So there is a myriad of things that we can do as a police department, but our tools only stretch so far.
Chief, going back to the uptick in calls, how did dispatch handle the sheer volume of calls coming in? Were they prioritized in any way? Because you had calls about shots being fired and calls about firework complaints coming in at the same time.
Well, I think it's a question for the 911 director. I don't want to speak for him. And I know him and his team do a great job. I think they try to put additional resources on when we know we're going to have an uptick, and I think that's part of their plan. When they do have holidays, we typically see an increase in call volume. But, I don't want to speak for the 911 director, but, I'll just give his men and women credit as to the job that they do as well. But you're right. Sometimes I'm out there, I hear dispatch calls coming in with regard to fireworks being heard, possible gunshots. Sometimes it's hard for our residents to kind of delineate between the two. Oh yeah, yeah, I'm frustrated. I think many police chiefs across the country are frustrated. Particularly, I'm frustrated because we don't have the issues here in Rochester that other police departments might have. We have done the work in our community to ensure that we have, equity in the bank if something were to happen here. And I think many police chiefs, when we didn't have the George Floyds in their communities, I think many police chiefs are saying, let's not make sure that we balance the issues of America when it comes to policing on the backs of the communities who don't have those issues. And like I said, I get the cause for change. I'm okay with sitting down at the table talking about reform. I'm all about that. And I will sit down and have a conversation with anybody who wants to talk about changes. And I think we have been open in the Rochester Police Department to doing that. But again, we don't have the issues. I mean, we have about 350,000 calls for service every year that our officers handle. And that's not included, those are documented calls, right? That's not including the probably hundreds of thousands more, if not million, contacts that we have throughout the year. The incident that I talked about on Charlie Avenue, that could have went very bad, right? That could have went very bad. So let's give our officers some credit for what they do when it comes to addressing some of the violent instances in our city. So I think that's where the frustration kind of lies.
Chief, can you talk at all about the statue? Is there any update on if you're looking for suspects, anything with the statue situation?
Sure. Well, my understanding is that, when the Frederick Douglass statue, I heard it made national news. The investigation will involve looking at cameras. I know there's a preliminary investigation that occurred. Looking at cameras, everything would be speculation as to why this might have occurred. Could have been individuals who, I don't even want to speculate until we hopefully arrest somebody, and then we'll be able to glean some information from the arrest. But it's certainly disheartening that whether it was out of pure boredom or if it was intentional, that someone would damage a statue that resembles something significant in our country. But the Rochester Police Department will do everything that it can to investigate the crime and hopefully hold somebody accountable for such.
Yeah, the president tweeted about it and said something about anarchists, and I think some politicians probably maybe tried to hint that maybe it was somehow tied to other statues that were toppled. Is that kind of social media, does it bother you? Is it not helpful? Or?
Well, I think, social media is a blessing and a curse, right? I think, if you were a police chief 10, 15, 20 years ago, when you didn't have social media, when things were not as, prevalent or in your face as they are now, or if word can get out in 30 seconds as to what's going on and you can get a mass gathering of people, certainly that makes our jobs difficult, and it puts a lot of conjecture out there, a lot of people to speculate. And I think sometimes you definitely have to make sure that the air is clear, or, you have to rely on the facts. They always say, people can have their own opinions, but you can't have your own set of facts, right? And so I think what's very important is that, we let the facts, take us where they need to take us. But right now, for me to kind of guess would just be pure speculation as to why anybody would choose to damage a statue in Maplewood Park.
What about your Park Avenue investigation, your person of interest that is still out there?
Yep. So that's where we utilize the media. That's where I think the media comes in handy. We release some photos of an individual who we suspect might be involved in a Park Avenue situation. Obviously we release those photos out of public safety and a community concern, and hopefully hopeful that the public will glean some information for us that can lead to an arrest. As I understand that we haven't had an incident since we have posted those pictures, but a lot of it is informative in nature, and we have made many arrests this year with the public's help. As I said, it goes back to saying that I can't do this alone as a police chief. The police department can't do it alone, but that's where we kind of rely on the community to kind of help us solve some of the crimes that we may need tips in.
You mentioned before that you're willing to talk with anybody, if anybody can sit down. The individuals who have been calling for defunding police, what kinds of conversations have been going on with individuals representing that point of view?
When you say individuals, you mean individuals like maybe activists or
Yeah,
people who are in government?
Who want to say defund the police. I mean, have they contacted, have they tried to get on your calendar?
No.
Have there been meetings, anything like that?
No. And again, I've said it publicly, I've said it privately, that I will sit down with anybody who wants to talk about any issue. I'm very accessible. There isn't anything, I don't hide from anything. So if anybody wants to sit down and talk with me, they can call my office, 585-428-7033, and we'll have a conversation, whether they want to do it virtually or they want to do it face-to-face.
Do you know when there would be an update on the statute situation? Regularly, or only when you have something?
Yeah, probably when we have something, but I'll make sure that we put something out if we get something that's noteworthy to put out. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay.